Nobody wanted the number 66. Cyrus Avery, an Oklahoma oilman turned highway commissioner, had spent 2 years lobbying Washington for the Chicago to Los Angeles highway to carry the designation US 60, a number ending in 0, which in the federal system marked a transcontinental route, a road of the first rank. He lost. Officials in Kentucky claimed US 60 for an east-west corridor through their state, and the Bureau of Public Roads offered Avery the consolation of US 62. Avery hated it. On April 30th, 1926, sitting in the Colonial Hotel in Springfield, Missouri, with 2 other state highwaymen, he scanned a list of unclaimed numbers and landed on 66. They sent a telegram to Washington that afternoon. If California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Illinois would accept 66 instead of 60, Oklahoma was inclined to agree. The number was approved on November 11th, 1926. Nobody called it historic. Nobody called it catchy. It was a leftover. Within 30 years, that leftover would become the most famous road number in the world. Within 60, it would be dead, officially decommissioned, pulled from every map, its signs taken down by highway departments as if it had never existed. The road that created hundreds of towns also destroyed them, or rather, the thing that replaced the road did. And the deepest irony of Route 66 is that the man who built it and the forces that killed it were arguing exactly the same thing. America needed better highways. Avery won that argument in 1926. He just didn't know he was also losing it. To understand what Avery was really doing, you have to understand what Oklahoma looked like when he got there. He'd been born in Pennsylvania in 1871, moved with his family to Missouri, attended William Jewell College, and then drifted to Oklahoma City to sell insurance before relocating to Tulsa in 1907, the same year Oklahoma achieved statehood. He bought a 1,400-acre farm northeast of the city, raised cattle and hogs, invested in oil. And he looked at the roads. Driving from Tulsa to Oklahoma City in those years, a distance of about 100 miles, took 6 hours over uneven dirt tracks that turned to impassable mud when it rained. In New Mexico, which had been a state for barely 14 years, the office of the state engineer reported in 1925 that only 207 cars a day used the road between Albuquerque and Gallup. In Arizona, a surveyor described the stretch between Ash Fork and Seligman as an unpaved trail where boulders had to be cleared by hand, suitable only for low speeds and high clearance. There was no national system. There were wagon ruts and local lanes and a few state-managed roads that stopped at the state line like conversations cut short. Avery saw what a connected highway could do for towns like Tulsa. He joined the Oklahoma Good Roads Association, became chairman of the Tulsa County Commission, got the 11th Street Bridge built across the Arkansas River. When Congress authorized a national numbered highway system in 1925, Avery made sure he was on the federal board appointed to draw the routes. His argument was geographic, but also nakedly commercial. A Chicago to Los Angeles road should not follow the northern or southern border of the country, where transcontinental routes already existed. It should cut diagonally, through the heartland, through places with no access to a major highway, through, not incidentally, Tulsa, where Avery owned a filling station and restaurant that happened to sit right along the proposed path. The route he pushed would run from Chicago to St. Louis, then southwest through Springfield, Joplin, Tulsa, Oklahoma City, across the Texas Panhandle, through New Mexico and Arizona, and into Los Angeles. It was approved. Conveniently, Route 66 ran right past Cyrus Avery's own businesses. But here is the thing about self-interest that occasionally redeems itself. The road actually worked. Not right away. In 1926, only about 800 of its 2,400 miles were paved, and in the western states, the surface was mostly graded dirt and gravel, the kind of road that swallowed tires and boiled radiators. The rest was a hodgepodge. A surviving stretch near Afton, Oklahoma, 3.5 miles of original pavement, just 9 feet wide, barely enough for a single car, still exists today, a relic of the patchwork era. Locals called these narrow strips sidewalk highways because that's about how wide they were. One lane of concrete with gravel shoulders, and if you met someone coming the other way, one of you pulled off and waited. The initial paving cost ran about $22,000 per mile, and states bore most of it. Illinois paved its section early, and by 1929 boasted 7,500 miles of paved roads statewide. Kansas, with only a 13-mile sliver of the route clipping its southeastern corner, finished fast. Missouri had its entire stretch paved by January 5, 1931, and the work crew on the last mile in Phelps County celebrated by tossing coins into the wet cement, a tradition that seems impossibly sentimental until you remember what those roads meant to communities that had never had one. The western states were slower, hemmed in by budget, terrain, and the sheer remoteness of places where construction crews had to haul materials across 50 miles of open desert to reach the next pour site. In 1929, the combined paved sections of Route 66 in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California amounted to just 64 miles. The rest was dirt, the kind of soapy, alkaline mud that stuck to axles and undercarriages when it rained, adding so much weight that cars bogged down completely. Route 66 did not become fully paved until 1938, 12 years after its designation. It was the first highway in the U.S. system to achieve that distinction, which tells you both how ambitious the project was and how primitive everything else remained. Before the pavement was finished, though, the road had already become something no one planned for. In March 1928, a sports promoter named Charles C. Pyle, known in the press as the P.T. Barnum of professional sports, organized a transcontinental foot race from Los Angeles to New York. The route followed 66 from California to Chicago, then cut east to Madison Square Garden. Pyle called it C.C. Pyle's International Transcontinental Foot Race. The press called it the Bunion Derby. 276 runners started from Ascot Speedway in Los Angeles on March 4th. 77 dropped out the first day. The runners slept in tents, ate from a chow line, and were trailed by a caravan of support vehicles that included journalists, a rolling shoe repair shop, and one of the first mobile radio stations in America. Pyle, ever the showman, also brought a traveling carnival that featured, among other attractions, a 5-legged pig and the embalmed remains of an Oklahoma outlaw. A 20-year-old Cherokee runner from Foyle, Oklahoma, named Andy Payne, entered the race because the $25,000 prize could save his family's farm. His father had borrowed money just to pay the entry fee. Payne ran with what his father described as a machine-like trot, not fast, but relentless. He ran through tonsillitis. He ran through desert heat and freezing mountain passes. When the race crossed into Oklahoma, crowds lined the road. Governor Henry Johnston came out. Will Rogers, an Oklahoma native and the most famous man in America, cheered from the roadside in Claremore, Payne's home territory. On May 26, 1928, after 84 days and 3,400 miles, Payne entered Madison Square Garden first. He'd worn through 5 pairs of shoes. He finished in 573 hours, 4 minutes, and 34 seconds. Only 55 of the original runners were still on their feet. Payne took the prize money home, paid off the family mortgage, built a new house, and bought land in northeastern Oklahoma. Oil and gas were later discovered on that land. He never ran competitively again. He spent the next 4 decades as clerk of the Oklahoma Supreme Court. A statue of him stands today along Route 66 in Foyle, frozen mid-stride in bronze, in a spot so quiet you can hear the wind. The Bunion Derby was publicity, but the Dust Bowl was a reckoning. Starting in the early 1930s, drought and wind tore the topsoil from the southern Great Plains, Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, the Panhandles. Farms that families had worked for generations turned to dust. Banks repossessed. Families loaded everything they owned onto flatbed trucks and jalopies and headed west on the one road that went where they needed to go. Route 66 was, by geographic accident, the main artery out of the disaster zone. Hundreds of thousands of people used it. They were called Okies, whether they came from Oklahoma or not, and they were not welcomed in most of the towns they passed through. In 1939, John Steinbeck published The Grapes of Wrath, a novel about a fictional Oklahoma family, the Jodes, who travel Route 66 to California and find misery instead of salvation. Steinbeck devoted an entire chapter to the road itself and gave it a name that stuck more permanently than any federal designation ever could. He called it the Mother Road. 66 is the path of a people in flight, he wrote. Refugees from dust and shrinking land, from the thunder of tractors and shrinking ownership. The book won the Pulitzer Prize. It was banned in several states and burned in others, and praised by everyone who read it without a financial interest in denying what it described. In the Soviet Union, Stalin banned it too, because it showed that even the poorest Americans could afford a car. The Dust Bowl turned Route 66 into a symbol of desperation. The war years turned it into a military corridor, convoys of trucks and troop transports moving equipment and personnel between defense installations across the Southwest, wearing the pavement down to rubble in places. Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri, built in 1940 and named after a Medal of Honor recipient, sat right alongside Route 66, and the traffic it generated helped keep the road's service economy alive even as gasoline rationing crimped civilian travel. But it was what happened after the war that turned Route 66 into a symbol of everything else. Freedom, adventure, the open road, the American West as a thing you could drive to in your own car on a weekend if you felt like it. Car ownership exploded. Families who'd spent the war years in factories and rationing now had money and gasoline and a road that ran 2,400 miles through 8 states to the Pacific Ocean. Between 1945 and 1960, automobile registrations in the United States nearly doubled. And along Route 66, a new economy sprouted like wildflowers after rain. The motels came first, not the national chains, which didn't yet exist in any serious way, but family-owned motor courts where you pulled your car up to your own little cabin and paid a few dollars for the night. The concept was simple and democratic. No bellhops, no formal lobbies, no dress codes, no one telling you how to act. You drove in, got a key, and the room was yours. The neon signs that marked these places, enormous, garish, blazing in pinks and greens and electric blues, were themselves a kind of technology. Neon was still relatively new and glamorous. If you were driving across the desert at night and saw one of those signs materialize on the horizon, it wasn't tacky, it was salvation. In Tucumcari, New Mexico, a town of a few thousand people in the high desert, so many motels were built to capture westbound traffic that the town eventually had more than 2,000 rooms. Billboards across the desert read, "Tucumcari Tonight," a marketing slogan so effective it became the town's unofficial motto. The Blue Swallow Motel opened there in 1939, some accounts say 1941, passed through several owners, and eventually landed in the hands of Floyd Redman, who gave it to his wife Lillian. She added the now famous neon sign in 1960. 100% refrigerated air, it promised. TV. Those were selling points. That was luxury on the Mother Road in 1960. Lillian Redman ran the Blue Swallow for decades, becoming as much a fixture of the road as the road itself. The motel was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1993. Then the diners, then the gas stations, then the attractions. The stranger the better, because a car traveling at 50 miles an hour needs a reason to stop, and the competition for that stop was fierce. The wigwam motels, where you slept inside a concrete teepee. Merrimack Caverns near Stanton, Missouri, which opened to tourists in 1935 and advertised itself on every barn and billboard for 500 miles in either direction. The Cadillac Ranch outside Amarillo, where 10 Cadillacs were buried nose first in a wheat field in 1974 by an art collective called Ant Farm, like the fossilized remains of some chrome-plated dinosaur. Visitors immediately began spray painting them, and the artists encouraged it. And in Shamrock, Texas, a man named John Nunn took an old nail, drew a design in the dirt of a vacant lot at the crossroads of Route 66 and Highway 83, and handed the sketch to an architect named J.C. Berry. What Berry built in 1936 for $23,000, about $490,000 in today's money, was the Tower Station and U-Drop Inn, an Art Deco gas station and cafe with 2 flared spires, glazed ceramic tiles, and enough neon to be visible from a mile away. The cafe was the only restaurant within 100 miles. The local newspaper called it the swankiest of the swank eating places. An 8-year-old boy won the naming contest. The U-Drop Inn would later inspire the design of Ramon's Body Shop in Pixar's Cars, which is what happens when a nail scratched in Texas dirt eventually reaches Hollywood. The road was also where the fast food industry was born, though nobody called it that yet. In San Bernardino, California, near the western end of Route 66, 2 brothers named Dick and Mac McDonald opened a barbecue drive-in in 1940. By 1948, they'd noticed that 80% of their revenue came from hamburgers, so they fired the car hops, cut the menu from 25 items to 9, and reopened as a walk-up stand that could serve a burger in 30 seconds. The model worked because the road delivered a relentless stream of customers who were in a hurry and had no loyalty to any restaurant but would remember speed and price. A milkshake machine salesman from Illinois named Ray Kroc visited in 1954, saw what the brothers had built, and convinced them to let him franchise it nationwide. He awarded 12 franchises in 1956, 40 in 1957, and 228 by 1960. The original San Bernardino building was demolished in 1972. The site is now a museum, owned by a man who also owns the ghost town of Amboy, another Route 66 relic, which is the kind of sentence that can only exist on this particular road. But the romance of Route 66, the open highway, the freedom to stop wherever you pleased, the equality of the asphalt, was not available to everyone. Dozens of towns along the route were sundown towns, places where black travelers were not welcome after dark, where signs warned them to keep moving, where the consequences of stopping were real and sometimes violent. For black Americans driving Route 66, the journey required a different kind of map. Victor Hugo Green's Negro Motorist Green Book, published annually from 1936 to 1966, which listed the hotels, restaurants, and gas stations that would serve black customers. The freedoms that Route 66 represented, the ability to go where you wanted, stop when you chose, eat where you were hungry, had terms and conditions that the songs and the television shows never mentioned. In February 1946, a songwriter named Bobby Troup packed a used 1941 Buick in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and headed west with his wife Cynthia to try his luck in Hollywood. Somewhere on the way to Chicago, where they'd pick up Route 66, Cynthia looked at the road map and suggested he write a song about Highway 40. Troup dismissed the idea. They were about to get on 66, which would carry them all the way to Los Angeles. Cynthia paused and said, "Get your kicks on Route 66. Troup knew immediately. He wrote most of the song during the drive, finishing it with a map after they arrived in California, and played it for Nat King Cole, who recorded it on March 16, 1946. The song spent 8 weeks on the pop charts. Chuck Berry covered it in 1961. The Rolling Stones put it on their debut album in 1964. By the time Troup died in 1999, he'd earned more than $4 million in royalties from those 6 words his wife said in a Buick. That same year the song hit the charts, a man named Jack DeVere Rittenhouse drove the full length of Route 66 and published a guidebook to Highway 66, the first mile-by-mile travel guide to the road, listing every motel, gas station, and cafe. The book captured the road at the exact moment it was tipping from necessity to romance. The Dust Bowl migrants were behind it. The post-war tourists were ahead. On October 7, 1960, CBS premiered a television series called Route 66. 2 young men, Todd Stiles, a Yale-educated son of privilege played by Martin Milner, and Buzz Murdoch, a streetwise orphan from Hell's Kitchen played by George Maharis, drove across America in a Chevrolet Corvette, taking odd jobs, meeting strangers, getting into and out of trouble. Chevrolet sponsored the show and provided a new Corvette each season. The show ran for 116 episodes across 4 seasons, most of them filmed on location, a rarity in an era when everything was shot on Hollywood sound stages. Guest stars included Robert Duvall, Robert Redford, Lee Marvin, Ed Asner, and William Shatner, before any of them were famous. Ironically, most episodes weren't actually filmed on Route 66. The show was shot in 25 states. The road only passed through 8. But it didn't matter. The name was the thing. The Corvette was the thing. The idea, 2 young men with nothing but a car and a highway and the possibility that something worth finding was in the next town, was the thing. Corvette production jumped past 10,000 units for the first time in 1960, the show's first year. All of this, the motels, the diners, the neon signs, the songs, the television show, the Corvettes, existed because of one fact. Route 66 ran through towns, not around them. When Cyrus Avery and the early highway planners laid out the route, they connected it to main streets. The road didn't bypass communities. It was their main commercial artery. If you drove Route 66 through Amarillo or Tucumcari or Flagstaff, you were on the town's central business street. You stopped for gas, ate at the diner, slept at the motel, maybe bought a souvenir, and the town's economy ran on the money you left behind. The road was the town, and the town was the road. And for 3 decades, it worked beautifully. Then a man who had seen better roads drew new lines on different maps. In the summer of 1919, a 28-year-old Army lieutenant colonel named Dwight David Eisenhower joined a military convoy that drove from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco. It took 62 days. The roads were so bad that bridges collapsed under the weight of the trucks. During World War II, now Supreme Allied Commander, Eisenhower saw the German Autobahn, Hitler's network of high-speed divided highways, and recognized its strategic value. Allied armies had used those highways to resupply forces racing across France and into Germany. After the war, he carried the memory. When he became president in 1953, he told Congress the nation badly needed new highways. On June 29, 1956, lying in a bed at Walter Reed Army Hospital recovering from surgery, Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act. It authorized $25 billion, the largest public works project in American history at that time, to build 41,000 miles of interstate highways over the next decade. The money would come from a new highway trust fund, fed by increased taxes on gasoline, diesel, and tires. The first contract awarded under the new act went to a company in Des Moines, Iowa, $1.1 million to lay 13.3 miles of 24-foot concrete pavement in Laclede County, Missouri, on Route 66 between Springfield and Rolla. The road was building its own replacement. That stretch would become part of Interstate 44. The interstates were designed by engineers who worked far from the places the highways would cross. The principle was speed and defense. Eisenhower had titled the legislation the National Interstate and Defense Highways Act, and part of the original funding was diverted from defense budgets, because highways wide enough and straight enough to land military aircraft on were, in the Cold War calculus, a matter of national survival. The roads would not run through towns. They would run around them or over them or past them, with exit ramps that might or might not bring traffic within reach of the businesses on the old road. Route 66 rises and falls with the land, one historian observed. It goes around obstacles, while the interstate just blasts through. By 1960, Interstate 40 had replaced much of Route 66 across the western states. Each state along the original route spent between $14 and $20 million constructing its portion of the interstate. By 1970, Interstate 55 had replaced it from Chicago to St. Louis, and Interstate 44 had replaced it from St. Louis to Oklahoma City. The replacements were faster and safer. They were also economically devastating to every town they bypassed. The dying happened in stages, town by town, like lights going out along a string. The cruelest part was the timing. The interstates didn't hit every town at once. They arrived decade by decade, state by state, so that a diner owner in Tucumcari could watch the traffic numbers from a bypassed town 300 miles east and know, with a certainty that approached physical pain, exactly what was coming for her. Oklahoma was first to feel it. In 1953, the Turner Turnpike opened between Tulsa and Oklahoma City, paralleling Route 66. And suddenly, the diners and gas stations between those two cities saw their traffic cut in half, then by 3/4, then to a trickle. The Will Rogers Turnpike followed in 1957, diverting traffic in the northeastern part of the state. As one historian put it, the road was a victim of its own success. The demand for faster highways that Route 66 had helped create was now the force destroying it. In New Mexico, communities fought. Business owners in small towns along the route lobbied, petitioned, and filed lawsuits to keep Interstate 40 from bypassing them. Some won concessions, an extra exit here, an interchange there. Most lost. When the interstate came through, the effect was almost instantaneous. In Tucumcari, which had built its entire economy around serving Route 66 travelers, the 1981 bypass drained the town like pulling a plug from a bathtub. Those 2,000 motel rooms emptied. Neon signs went dark. Restaurants that had served travelers for 40 years locked their doors and never reopened. The town's population, which had peaked at nearly 7,000, began a decline that hasn't reversed. Today, the Blue Swallow Motel still operates, carefully preserved, its neon lovingly maintained. But its guests now come mostly from Europe. Germans, Britons, Japanese tourists on heritage road trips, visitors from countries that have no Route 66 of their own and romanticize the one America abandoned. Williams, Arizona held out longest. The town sits at 6,700 feet in the Kaibab National Forest, about an hour south of the Grand Canyon, and its businesses had thrived for decades on traffic from Route 66 travelers making the detour north to the canyon rim. When the Arizona Department of Transportation announced plans to complete Interstate 40 around Williams, the town fought back, not with petitions, but with lawsuits, court battle after court battle, stalling the construction for years. Business owners had watched other Arizona Route 66 towns wither after being bypassed in the 1970s, and they knew what was coming. The lawsuits were eventually settled when the state agreed to build 3 exits connecting Williams to the interstate, preserving some access to the town. It was the best deal they could get. On October 13, 1984, 500 people gathered at Interstate 40's new Grand Canyon Boulevard exit to mark the opening of the bypass. The Bill Williams Mountain Men rode through on horseback, breaking through a paper Route 66 banner. Olson Motors drove a brand new Suburban through behind them. A helicopter brought in the guest of honor, Bobby Troop, now 65 years old, the man who had written the song in a Buick 38 years earlier. He performed it one more time on the asphalt of the overpass, and for the occasion he added Williams to the list of towns in the lyrics. Media from around the world covered the event. BBC, NBC Nightly News, NPR, Good Morning America. The Chamber of Commerce director, Eric Eikenberry, had called in every favor he had to make the bypass a celebration rather than a funeral. He understood something instinctive about marketing. If the death of Route 66 was going to be a story either way, Williams might as well be the town that owned the story rather than the town the story buried. According to at least one account, some Williams residents in the years before the bypass had been so angry about the coming interstate that they shot at the bulldozers and construction equipment working on the new road. It did no good. The following year, 1985, the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials officially decommissioned U.S. Route 66. The signs came down. The number was erased from official maps. On June 26, 1979, the committee had already noted that Route 66 markings no longer served as a through-state guide to tourists, but in fact generated confusion because the route coincided with interstate designations over much of its length. A road that had carried a nation through depression and drought and war and post-war prosperity and the birth of rock and roll and the invention of fast food was, in the eyes of the federal government, no longer a road at all. But here's the thing about roads. They don't disappear just because a government says they're not there anymore. The concrete is still in the ground. The motels are still standing, or their ruins are. The neon signs, some of them, still glow. And the people who remember what the road was, or who have heard the stories from their parents, or who have read Steinbeck, or listened to Nat King Cole, or watched Todd and Buzz in their Corvette on a Friday night, those people started coming back. The preservation movement began almost immediately after decommissioning. State and local groups formed to mark the surviving stretches of the old road, to restore landmarks, to lobby for heritage designations. In 1999, the federal government designated Route 66 a National Historic Corridor. Angel Delgadillo, a barber in Seligman, Arizona, another bypassed town, organized the Historic Route 66 Association of Arizona and became one of the movement's most visible champions, arguing that the road could be saved if people remembered why it mattered. Some states reclassified their surviving sections as State Highway 66, or State Route 66, or Historic Route 66, keeping the double sixes on the signs as if in defiance of the bureaucrats who'd tried to erase them. Oklahoma was the first state to design and install distinctive Route 66 historic markers and donated a section of original 1933 pavement from western Oklahoma to the Smithsonian for its America on the Move exhibit. In 2006, Pixar released Cars, an animated film about a fictional town called Radiator Springs that was bypassed by an interstate. A story so transparently drawn from Route 66's history that the film's creators acknowledged driving 1,200 miles of the old road during research trips. The U-Drop Inn in Shamrock became Ramon's Body Shop. The entire concept of the movie was essentially the story of what the interstate did to the mother road, told to a generation of children who had never heard of Cyrus Avery or Tucumcari or the Bunion Derby. A 2012 economic impact report found that 200,000 structures still stood abandoned along the old route, an astonishing number, a continent-wide ruin of gas stations, motor courts, cafes, and curio shops, all of them monuments to an economy that vanished when the exit ramps were built somewhere else. Some places adapted. Oklahoma City's old Route 66 corridor, once the main commercial drag through town, had emptied out when the interstate pulled traffic away. In the 1970s, Vietnamese immigrants, drawn by cheap rents, moved into the abandoned storefronts and opened restaurants and grocery stores. The strip is now called Little Saigon, a thriving ethnic enclave built in the skeleton of a dead highway economy. The road reinvented itself with different people selling different things to different customers, which is what roads have always done when given the chance. In the Mojave Desert, the town of Amboy, once a busy Route 66 stop with a school, a church, a post office, and Roy's Motel and Cafe, whose 50-foot neon sign was erected in 1959, had been abandoned for decades when a man named Albert Okura bought the entire town in 2005. Okura was the founder of the Juan Pollo restaurant chain and already owned the original McDonald's site in San Bernardino, another Route 66 property. His son later described the purchase. He pretty much just said, "Who else do you know owns a town?" The gas station was defunct. The buildings were full of debris. It took until 2008 to get the pumps working again. Old-fashioned mechanical pumps, the kind where an attendant fills your tank by hand, because that was part of the experience, part of the transaction between the road and the traveler that the interstate had made obsolete. Cyrus Avery did not live to see any of this. He spent the 1930s trying to get himself elected president of the U.S. Highway 66 Association, the organization he'd helped create, and never succeeded. He eventually moved to Los Angeles, the western end of the road he'd built, and died there on July 2nd, 1963, at the age of 91. He was buried in Tulsa at Rose Hill Cemetery, back in the city he'd maneuvered a federal highway through 4 decades earlier. A street in southwest Tulsa bears his name. The 11th Street Bridge, which he'd championed as a county commissioner and which carried Route 66 over the Arkansas River, was renamed the Cyrus Avery Route 66 Memorial Bridge in 2004. In 2012, a bronze sculpture was installed at Cyrus Avery Centennial Plaza in Tulsa, depicting Avery stopping his Ford Model T on the bridge as the car frightens 2 horses pulling a wagon loaded with oil barrels. It is a monument to the exact moment the old world met the new one: horse and automobile, oil barrel and gasoline engine, the road that was and the road that was coming. The road Avery created ran 2,448 miles through 8 states, from the corner of Jackson Boulevard and Michigan Avenue in Chicago to the intersection of Lincoln and Olympic Boulevards in Santa Monica, where you could stand and see the Pacific. It generated billions in commerce. It moved 1 million Dust Bowl refugees. It birthed the motel industry, the drive-in restaurant, the roadside attraction, the family road trip as an American institution. It carried Andy Payne to a $25,000 prize and a new life. It carried Bobby Troop to $4 million in royalties. It carried the Jodes to California and heartbreak. It carried 10 million tourists a year to the Grand Canyon. And it was killed by the same idea that created it. A man looked at a map, decided the country needed a better road, and drew a line. Today in Williams, Arizona, a mural on a downtown wall reads, "Last town bypassed by I-40, October 13th, 1984. Below it, the Route 66 shield, the double sixes, white on black, is painted as precisely as if it still meant something official. The motels on the main drag have vintage neon. The Grand Canyon Railway still runs tourists north to the rim and back. The town that fought hardest against the bypass now sells its bypass story as the main attraction. In the souvenir shops, you can buy a Route 66 sign made of tin, stamped to look old, weathered to look authentic, priced to move. The signs are manufactured in China. They sell briskly. The tourists, many of them from overseas, carry them home as proof that they drove a road that no longer exists through towns that almost didn't survive it, along a route that a man from Tulsa scratched onto a map because he thought it might be good for business.